Our schools have risen to the occasion and found ways to continue providing instruction, keep students engaged in learning from afar, continue serving meals for children who otherwise would have gone hungry, and support students and families through an immensely challenging time. When we moved all of our schools to remote learning, we were clear that that shutdown would extend for the remainder of the school year. This school year is over. Seniors have graduated, even though it has not been the celebration our students and families would have wanted. We know parents want to know what to expect this summer and in the fall. To be clear, all Virginia schools will open for students next year, but the school experience will look very different. These phases will allow in-person instruction, but slowly. We'll start with small groups, and we'll allow each school division the flexibility that it needs to respond to the needs of its own locality. I want to be clear that these phases provide our schools with options for consideration, not mandates to open their buildings for summer school. Rather, this phased approach provides some in-person instructional opportunities for divisions to consider throughout the summer, and will help divisions begin planning for the 2021 school year. What this looks like on the ground is that, to start with, most instruction is still virtual. In phase 2, which most schools can enter right now, schools may offer in-person instruction for preschool through 3rd graders and English language learners. They can also provide in-person instruction for students with disabilities. It also means school-based summer camps may operate with some restrictions. For the future, phase 3 will allow schools to shift to in-person instruction for all students. But they will need to put physical distancing measures in place. For example, schools may have to stagger schedules or adopt class schedules that blend in-person and remote learning. We'll expect schools to have 6 feet between desks and workstations. There will be restrictions on mixing groups of students. Schools will have to stagger the use of communal spaces, such as cafeterias, or close them. There should be remote learning and telework options for high-risk students and staff. There will be daily health screenings and wearing of face coverings by staff where physical distancing cannot be maintained. While our Executive Order 63 includes exceptions for face coverings in school settings, we will encourage students to wear face coverings as well, especially our older students. Schools must submit plans to the Virginia Department of Education outlining how they'll comply with these guidelines before entering phase 2 or phase 3. School divisions also have flexibility to limit in-person instruction if needed. This approach to reopening our schools protects and prioritizes the health and social, emotional, and physical well-being of students and staff as public health conditions evolve. Now I'll ask our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. James Lane, to speak about this guidance for our schools. And I would just want to remind all of you a significant amount of work, a significant amount of discussion with input from a lot of folks around the communities in Virginia has taken place, a lot of meetings. And so, Dr. Lane, I just wanted to take the opportunity I have for Virginia to thank you for all of your great work. And I know that parents and faculty, educators are all very excited to move forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor. While we are here to announce Virginia's return to school plan, I want to pause and recognize the broader situation we find ourselves in as a city, a commonwealth, and as a nation in this moment. We are having overdue and necessary but difficult conversations about systemic and historic racism and its continuing presence in American 2020. Education is a system with its own racist history and present-day challenges. And as the agency responsible for schools, we remain committed to tackling these conversations and necessary policy changes to ensure that the color of a student's skin doesn't dictate the education opportunity that they have access to. We must eliminate achievement and opportunity gaps. We must have culturally relevant standards and practices. And I am committed to eradicating racism from our schools and communities. I'd like to now walk through the particulars of the phased reopening plan for all of Virginia's K-12 public and private schools. This plan gradually phases in opportunities for in-person instruction while prioritizing the health and safety of students and staff. Schools will open for all students next year, but as the governor said, instruction will look different. Virginia schools are required to deliver new instruction to students for the 2020-2021 academic year. And some of that will happen in person, and some of that will happen via remote learning. Virginia's return to school plan aligns to the governor's reopening phases within the Forward Virginia Blueprint. It scales up opportunities for in-person instruction beginning immediately. It focuses on the health, social, emotional, and physical well-being of our students and staff. And it prioritizes the needs of our most vulnerable learners for whom in-person instruction is most essential and remote learning was the most difficult. This approach is equity focused, but moves us to the end goal of safe in-person instruction for all students. So to reiterate some of what the governor already shared, in phase one, which begins immediately for everyone, but obviously many of our communities have moved on to phase two, special education and childcare for working families can be done in person. We've heard from our community significant concerns about the needs of our students with disabilities and the need to get those students back into their services and programs immediately. And so that's allowed in all schools. We move to phase two, where the programs for students with disabilities and childcare for working families is expanded upon with options for preschool through third grade students, English learners, and summer camps in school buildings. And again, we wanted to focus on getting education to our earliest learners because of the challenges that they were facing in the remote learning environment, while also making sure that we could keep them safe. In phase three, all students may begin to receive in-person instruction, but it must be accommodated within strict social distancing measures. So this will likely require staggered schedules and innovative approaches to the way that students come to our buildings. And we are all looking forward to the day that we're on beyond phase three, resuming to a new normal and having all of our students in buildings every day. The phases provide maximum flexibility at any given time and apply to both public and private schools. It's important to note that schools may be more limited in their in-person instructional offerings than the phase allows. So it allows flexibility for school divisions to put in more stringent measures as they need based on the conditions in their community. Before entering phase 2 and 3, every school in Virginia must submit plans to the Department of Education outlining their compliance with the VDH and CDC mitigation strategies. The Virginia Council for Private Education, who's here with us, will receive plans submitted by private schools accredited through the VCPE-approved state-recognized accrediting associations. But all of those health-related plans will come to the DOE, and we'll work closely with VCPE on those for private schools. Our public schools will also be required to submit a plan for providing new instruction for all students in the 2020-2021 academic year, regardless of phase or their operational status of the school at the time. Most of the state has entered phase 2. Richmond and Nova and others are still exceptions, but phase 1 is relevant for a few jurisdictions now and would be relevant if we move back to a more restrictive environment due to public health conditions. So we wanted to make sure you knew about phase 1 as well. But that means that most school divisions will move to phase 2. So I'm going to go into a little bit more depth on each phase and then wrap up and turn it back to the governor. In phase 1, again, instruction is predominantly remote. However, exceptions will be made for schools to offer in-person instruction for students with disabilities. Schools may elect to provide extended school year services and school year special education services, including private placements with strict social distancing. Students will only attend such programs if the individualized education program team agrees it is appropriate and the parent consents. Then we move into phase 2, where we still have predominantly remote instruction. But in addition to the phase 1 exceptions, schools may offer those in-person instruction for pre-K through third grade students, English learners, and permit summer camps to operate in school settings. It's important to note that in phase 2, Large group gatherings are limited to 50 people based on the governor's still existing executive order. In phase 3, schools may shift to in-person instruction for all students, but with those physical distancing measures in place, staggered schedules and alternative blended options for remote learning will be important for students. In all phases, schools are expected to follow the CDC school guidance strategies for protecting the health of staff and students, cleaning and disinfecting, ensuring physical distancing, limiting the mixing of groups and students, and implementing mitigation strategies. But this also means that remote options must be made available for students and staff who have complicating health factors and who are safer at home. So all schools must have a plan for those students and staff as well. The physical distancing strategies include, but are not limited to, 6-foot physical distancing between desks, workstations, teachers and students and other students to the greatest extent possible. Restrictions on mixing groups of students or classes of students. The combination of those measures will likely necessitate staggered or unique schedules. Closing or staggering the use of communal spaces, including cafeterias, so students may have to be served in their classroom. As the governor mentioned, daily health screenings of students and staff. The department will be providing guidance on those. All schools must provide those remote learning exceptions and teleworking for students and staff who are at higher risk of severe illness. Use of cloth face coverings by staff is required when 6-foot social distancing cannot be maintained. For students, face coverings are encouraged, but not required as developmentally appropriate, and especially in older students and in settings where students cannot maintain physical distancing. Again, this guidance applies to all of Virginia's public and private schools. More detail will be available in the coming days. I will share the Department of Education has produced Recover, Redesign, and Restart. This is nearly a 126-page guide that will go to our school divisions today and be posted online that schools can use to assist in their planning for opening schools under these phases. We find that we believe that this document is comprehensive. It's been informed by a diverse set of education stakeholders, and schools should use it in their planning. It was created with the guidance of numerous task forces, dozens of teachers, principals, parents, education leaders, superintendents that came together to make this possible from every corner of the Commonwealth. We are confident that this additional guidance will help schools as they develop plans. We know there will be lots and lots of questions on the school opening plans, and so with that, I'll turn it back to the governor. Also posted today from the governor will be the phased guidance for Virginia schools that shares everything that I've shared today in writing, along with a PowerPoint that can easily be accessed to provide that information. Thank you, Governor, and I look forward to any questions.
Well, thank you again for all.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing there because I think we get the gist of that. And yeah, I'm unmuted. On Monday, the deans and directors have a Zoom meeting with Dr. Lane. He was the second person that you heard. And he is going to fill us in on how the colleges are going to be, colleges and universities can reintegrate our students and teacher prep programs back into the schools. So we'll see how that goes. One thing, I'm not sure, I have not heard from the principal of Big Island Elementary School. I don't think that we're going to be able to do the class this summer, but I'll keep you posted. Okay. One of the things that, though, you do need to be prepared for is I'm sure that when we go back into the schools, you will have to wear or have available face masks. So if you don't have any now, you need to get some. Okay. I would highly recommend that. I'm sure that schools are thinking about the number of children that have asthma, because asthma is one of the risk factors. So, and that does not have any age restrictions on it. You can get, there are a lot of children with asthma, a lot of young adults with asthma that get the COVID-19. Okay, my daughter's 27 and yeah, she was really, really sick and she has asthma. So you have to be really careful if you have asthma and you're in the schools, wear a mask. If you're in any of the risk categories, because remember, right now, with the warm weather, the virus is decreasing. What I've been hearing in meetings at the colleges as we are developing a plan to open the colleges is as the colder weather starts, they're expecting another peak. For instance, the dean told me the other day that our January class, he said, just kind of alert the students that may have to be online because they're not sure what's going to happen in that December break. Okay. I do want to tell those of you who are taking classes beginning in August, and I'm not sure if I told you this or not, we are starting on the regular Randolph schedule, which is the start date of August 31st. They took down that schedule and they have posted the new schedule. So don't look at the new schedule on the college website. That has classes starting August 24th. We are not starting on the 24th. We're starting on August 31st. And we're following our regular 7-week schedule. Okay. So I just wanted to let you know if you're looking for this schedule, I'll try to get a hold of the new schedule and post that somewhere or email it to everybody so you have it. I'm sure that it still must exist in somebody's office, the old schedule. Okay. So a couple things they talked about today that are important in addition to the COVID-19 are going to be the children's response to what is happening in our social climate. And you as teachers will need to grapple with a lot of the stressors that are going to come to school with children. Okay, that culturally responsive pedagogy is going to be extremely important. I'll be interested to see what the Virginia Department of Ed comes forth with. Now, they started working on, they had an equity summit a year and a half ago. I was invited to that summit and I attended that summit, and the whole goal was to decrease the equity issue, which basically goes back to racial inequities and racism in our schools, which exist, right? We all know that they exist. And one of Randolph's tenets has always been justice in our schools for all learners and making sure that all learners have the same curriculum opportunities. So we'll be talking, I'm sure that will be at the forefront of a lot of our classes, a lot of our discussions. And it doesn't stop at racial lines, right? There are religious injustices, there are injustices for students with disabilities. So all of these things will be addressed and could be more at the forefront, I think, of the discussions in schools, when you're working with teachers in schools. It's going to create an additional stressor. So we have the pandemic and we have the social disparities and all of that kind of coming at the same time that are going to create, schools are going to look and feel differently when we come back together. What comments, concerns, questions do you have based on these things that we've talked about? No? Okay. All right. I wanted to take a few minutes today to talk about some of the things, IEPs, 504 plans, the difference between accommodations and modifications, okay? And then also the difference between an eligibility meeting and an IEP meeting. So let's start there. Who can describe, compare and contrast an eligibility meeting with an IEP meeting?
I'll just take a stab at it.
Okay.
Eligibility meeting would be, I think, when everyone would come together and see if a student met the criteria to have an IEP, and maybe determine in which category that child might fit to qualify for the IEP. And so it would be based on evidence collected by, from the teacher's observations, maybe the school psychologist, any outside diagnoses or medical information, whatever that may be. And then the committee as a whole would decide whether to consider that child for an IEP.
Correct. Whether the child qualifies under IDEA for an IEP. Okay, so the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that is in line with the IEP process. And that eligibility meeting occurs after all of the evaluations have been conducted. Now, you need to check whatever state you're in, because this will vary from state to state, as to the timelines that you have to, like, once a parent has requested an evaluation, okay, the school has a timeline they must meet. Does anybody know Virginia's timeline? They have 60 school days. Okay. North Carolina is different. They have 90 days. And that includes if there's breaks or Saturdays and Sundays. So and here's what's really important. If you have a parent who comes to you and says, something's not quite right, I would like my child evaluated. Does anybody know what would the best advice to give to that parent? What might you as a teacher say?
I think it said so. This might be something else I'm thinking about, but I think it said somewhere about contacting the principal.
Mm-hmm. And how should they contact the principal?
I think it was through email, but yeah. I could be wrong.
In writing, exactly. Email, but not verbally. Not verbally. It does not, the timeline doesn't start until the request has been made in writing. Okay, that's really important. I had a parent that I was working with, and she kept meeting with the principal at this elementary school, and the principal just said, just come back and talk to me. And the parent kept saying, I want my child evaluated. And the principal kept saying, we'll get on that. We'll work on it. We'll see what we can do. The parent must have gone in 10 times. And finally, she came to me and said, I can't get them to move. And I said, did you put it in writing? She said, well, no, the principal told me I didn't need to. I know, no. Send an email today to the principal, and then the clock starts. And she was amazed. She goes, oh my gosh, that made such a big difference, because it's a legal requirement, okay? So there are these different timelines. So once and then they have to get these evaluations done in a timely manner, okay? Which, 60s, it's a long process. And sometimes that really surprises parents, because then after the 60 days, they have 30 days to there's all of these timelines, and we'll go over those timelines. I don't have them in front of me right now. I've been working a lot in North Carolina, so I have the North Carolina timelines on my brain. But you just want to make sure if you move to a different state, whatever state you're working in, to read the documents where it outlines the timelines, because IDEA, the revised IDEA, allows states to create their own timelines within these parameters, okay? So different states will write their state laws a little bit differently, okay? So you do have to be careful about that. So, and the evaluation process can be very intimidating for parents and for students, because it is pretty rigorous. So a complete a psychoeducational evaluation must be done. And what that means is that the student has to be evaluated using educational assessments and the psychoeducational assessments. That doesn't mean a psychological evaluation. What it means is they would be given like an IQ test, or they would be given the Woodcock-Johnson, the WIAT, or some other evaluations that have to be given by a qualified person, right? So if you go to buy tests, right? So let's say that I want to give the Woodcock-Johnson, okay? I have to order it from Pearson. Pearson owns all these tests. They sell all these tests. There's 3 levels of test, A, B, and C. So you have to send in your qualifications to them, and then they will tell you, you can purchase A level test, B level test, or C level tests, okay? So I can buy all of them, but like a classroom teacher could buy probably A level tests with a bachelor's degree. Sometimes, depending on what kind of master's degree you have, you can buy A and B. That means you're qualified to give those assessments. Like you could buy the WIAT, you could buy the Shaywitz dyslexia screening as a teacher with a master's degree, okay? So the teachers, the special education teachers will give assessments. The school psychologist will give assessments. And if the parent wants outside assessments, they may go out and get outside assessments, and the school must accept those evaluations, okay? And all of that information comes together. In addition to that, there has to be classroom observations, right? There's a requirement of at least 1 classroom observation, but I always tell parents to try to get 2 classroom observations on a child. And that's just to kind of look at how the child interacts with their peers, how the child interacts with the teacher. Does the child exhibit autistic tendencies? Is the child extremely shy? Do they show ADHD tendencies? Let me back up a little because I missed a point. Let's say a parent comes to you as a teacher and says, something's not quite right. Now, you as a teacher can say to the parent, well, let's take a look at some of the students' work and let me explain to you some of the things that I see behavior-wise, subjectively, or not subjectively, objectively in the classroom, right? Keeping your subjective opinion out of it. You can say that as a teacher. What you cannot say is, well, I think you need to get your child tested for ADHD, or I think your child is dyslexic, right? You cannot tell the parent that you suspect a certain type of disability, because the only people that can do that are people qualified, and only when you have the appropriate data, okay? So really never tell a parent that you think their child's autistic, or you think their child is dyslexic, or has ADHD. There's legal reasons for that, but also sometimes that will scare parents away. They will just decide they won't believe you. They don't want their child labeled. And if you say ADHD, most parents will jump right to, I'm not putting my child on medication. Okay. So always keep that in mind. So now we are at the evaluation phase. In addition to the testing that occurs, a home visit is conducted, which is the most bizarre thing I have ever gone through, because I've experienced all of this with my son, right? So he was 8 years old when we went through all of this. And to get an IEP, you have to go through the school's evaluation process, because we had already been to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota with him. But the school, you have to go through their evaluation protocols. So they come to the house, they're walking around the house, and I'm a special ed teacher, and I'm a parent who works with, I advocate for parents, but when you're on the other side, they're walking around a clipboard in my house, and they're asking me, do you have any of your child's artwork hanging on the walls? And I'm like, oh crap, where's, like, do I have it? Oh yes, it's on this wall here. Or they're looking, what kinds of reading material do you have available and where do you keep it? And they're looking around the house, what kind of toys do you have for your child? And they're going from room to room, and you feel like they're judging you, like, am I a good parent? And then, as they're like, well, we'd like to see the bedroom. And I'm thinking, oh, how clean is that bedroom? I haven't been up in Casey's bedroom. So it can be a very intimidating process for parents to go through when somebody comes into your house to evaluate the appropriateness of your living environment for that child's education. So as teachers, it's really important to keep that in mind, right? Because, I can't imagine a parent who is low income, right, and can barely put food on the table, having to worry about having the Washington Post or a bookshelf full of children's reading material, right? That is just not something that they are focused on at this time. So as teachers, try to be empathetic through this whole process because it is not easy for parents or children to go through, okay? So once all of that is done, then you sit down in the meeting, and under IDEA, and this often doesn't happen either, parents are part of the eligibility team and they are part of the IEP team. And very frequently they are not treated that way, okay? You will walk into these meetings. How many of you have been in an eligibility meeting or an IEP meeting? Okay.
I have.
You have?
Yes.
Kiesha, is that you talking?
Yes.
Okay.
That's me.
So how many people were in the room, Kiesha?
Sorry. It was all of the teachers, including the principals, both principals.
Oh,
and my mother and me.
Oh, you were the student. Okay.
No, my brothers are the students.
Your brothers. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you remember how your mother felt walking into that room?
I think it was kind of neutral.
Kind of
but do you mean for the eligibility or just for the IEP meeting in general?
eligibility.
Well, I'm not sure. I think it was kind of intimidating for her just because of a lot of the stuff that was going on and because it was for both of my brothers.
Yeah.
It was a huge process for them in the beginning. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
and that's what most parents say. This is really intimidating.
Yeah.
The first eligibility meeting we went to with my son, my husband, who was an engineer at the time, he's now a college professor. We walked, well, first of all, here's their first mistake. I haven't told you this story, have I? Okay, because I forget which class I told it to. So we go through all that. We go through the house visit, he goes through all the testing again, because remember he had been at the Mayo Clinic. And we walk, they schedule the eligibility meeting. We live in Forest, not too far from Jefferson Forest High School, okay? They schedule the meeting in downtown Bedford, 40 minutes from where we live, at the school administration building. And I'm thinking, that's weird because the law says you're supposed to have it at a convenient location for the parent, and most likely, and the best place is the child's school. So we drive to the Bedford, we go into the meeting. The first thing we were told is, we're on a timeline, you have 40 minutes. Because we have another parent in for the next eligibility meeting behind you. Illegal. There's no time constraint. The parent can take as much time as they want in an eligibility meeting until they clearly understand everything that's going on. So a school division cannot tell you, as a parent or as a teacher, there's a timeline, because they've got to get so many parents through the process. And I said to them, no, there is no timeline. According to IDEA, we have as much time as we would like. And she wasn't too happy with me. that set the meeting off on the wrong tone, because from that minute on, this was the school psychologist in Bedford County, she was on the defensive. My husband's reaction to that, and remember, he has an undergrad engineering degree, and he had a master's in business administration at that time. He came out of that meeting, he said, "Oh my God, that was awful. I had no idea what anybody was talking about. It was all jargon to me. I was so intimidated, I couldn't say anything." Most parents will say they feel very intimidated by the whole process. So the eligibility meeting starts, and in an eligibility meeting, they begin to read everything. They can't say to a parent, "Would you like us to read to you all this documentation?" They just have to start reading it to the parent. The reason you can't ask the parent if they want it read is because if you have a parent typically who is not very good at reading, and even though the documentation is supposed to be given to the parent 3 days prior to the meeting, and so that they can read it, if you ask them in the meeting, most likely they're going to say, "No, you don't have to read it to me." So they just have to start reading. And then if the parent then can say, "That's fine, I already read the documents, you don't need to read it out loud." And that's what I did. I said, "We've read the documents, you don't need to read the documents out loud. We can skip that part of the process." But that is supposed to happen. If it doesn't happen, just know that the school division is not following legal protocols. So then we get into the discussion of whether the child is eligible. And so this is a long time ago. So he was 8. Oh, and the protocols are now just getting ready to change. He was 8, and at that time you could use discrepancy model or processing model. Okay, so discrepancy is if there's a discrepancy in the test scores that is 2 standard deviations from the mean. Okay, so that means the child is, if it's like, I don't like to use grade levels, but that's usually the easiest to understand. So if he's reading at or his writing sample is at a kindergarten level and he's in 2nd grade, that's a discrepancy. It's a 2-year discrepancy, okay? But usually you're using the standard deviations for your discrepancies. All right, so he did not have major discrepancies because he's very intelligent, right? So he compensated really well. He could read. He can't spell, he can't write. Here's another thing that they often don't do. They don't do spelling inventories or a spelling assessment on children, which they really need to do if you suspect a language-based learning disability. And we'll get into that later. But so the school psychologist said he doesn't qualify. And I said, yes, he does qualify. She was adamant. They did not qualify him. We left that meeting and they basically said he's not failing in school. He doesn't qualify under IDEA, which is not true. That is a myth. But that myth, they often try to sell to parents. Okay? So I said to my husband, we're not going to fight this right now. I know exactly what to do. So we go home. When Casey comes home from school, I said to my husband, we're not helping him. No homework help. He's doing the homework by himself. He's studying for his spelling test by himself, which you can imagine how much time an 8-year-old boy spent on that, right? I said, good to go. So he goes to school, right? The interim report comes back. He's got a D in spelling. I called the school. I said, we have a change in performance. He now has a D. Reconvene the eligibility meeting. There's nothing they could do. There's a change in performance. Once there's a change in, and I try to get parents to do this all the time, and they really don't like to do that because they don't like to see their child do poorly, right? And I said, but in the long run, that he's not gonna remember, or you just tell him, no big deal, it's an interim report, you'll be fine. But I knew that D was gonna happen. So we reconvened the eligibility meeting and I said to them, oh, and by the way, under IDEA regulations and under the Code of Virginia, you have to schedule the meeting at a place that's convenient for the family, which would be the elementary school, which is not even a half a mile from where I live. Okay. So grapevines are small. We go to the school that day, and I had the pediatrician calling in. So we had all this documentation. Here's another good strategy that you can give parents. I took my IDEA law book with me, and I tabbed it. And I set that book in front of me. Tabs help. And I could tell. So the director of special education came to the meeting. And she started the meeting by saying, first, I would like to apologize to you for what happened to the last eligibility meeting because it was not run correctly, nor were the findings appropriate. And she turns to the school psychologist who was sitting there, and she said, and what would you like to say to Dr. Schimler? And she made the school psychologist apologize because it was that, or she was really worried they were going to get sued because they probably had 10 violations of IDEA in that initial eligibility meeting, right? And the director of special education realized, okay, we're dealing with somebody who teaches school law, and you run an eligibility meeting like that, you open us up to a can of worms, right? But then, of course, that shouldn't happen. You shouldn't have to have a doctorate in an area to get your child's services, which is why I do pro bono advocacy work for parents all the time, because I think it's just horrible what happens in these meetings. The teachers, and you will be there as the teacher, prep your parents for this. Teach them how to ask good questions. Be there as a support person for them. I really like New York State and Texas. Those are two states where parents are provided a free advocate for an eligibility meeting and a free advocate for IEP meetings. And the advocates they do not have any interactions with the school division, and they're paid by the state, but not by the Virginia Department of Education. They're paid by another state organization, which I think is really helpful to parents. So we go through the eligibility meeting again. He is found eligible. Then we reconvene for an IEP meeting. We write the IEP, which the special ed teacher at his elementary school was excellent. She knew exactly what he needed because she had been working with him before. And that went much smoother because we knew exactly what was supposed to go in. So just kind of keep in mind, and the important point here is that as a teacher, when you're going into these meetings, make sure that you understand the legal requirements, because here's also a very important point. You as the classroom teacher, once that IEP is written, you are legally, once you sign your name, that's a legal document. And you are legally responsible to implement that IEP. And if you do not, you as an individual may be part of a civil lawsuit. Your asset parents can sue you as an individual. And you would have to pay, your assets would go to paying, if you lost that lawsuit and you were found negligent and not following a legal document, you could be sued personally. A lot of parents will sue the school division because they think the school division has more money, but teachers have been sued before as individuals. Okay, it's more often that school divisions are sued, but an individual teacher can be sued. Okay, so I've been talking a lot. Any questions about that whole process?
Is that all true for 504 plans also, everything you were saying, or is that different?
504 plans are different. they are not, let's see, so the 504 is the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, I believe, if I have that date right. Okay, so you're protected under the Rehabilitation Act, which is different from an IEP. Again, different states do different things. Typically, 504 plans are developed for students with more minor disabilities, and they include mostly accommodations, not modifications to the curriculum, or not specialized instruction. However, that's not true in Texas. In Texas, they give 504 plans to every child identified as dyslexic, and they provide them specialized instruction under the 504 plan. The problem with that is if you move to a different state where they don't use the 504s in that way, and they require an IEP for specialized instruction, which would be the Orton-Gillingham method or the Wilson method, or working with a special education teacher, because IDEA funding is different from 504 funding. There's more money out of IDEA than there is for the Rehabilitation Act, okay? So I'm always telling parents, if your child needs specialized instruction, push for an IEP. They have more legal protections under IDEA, okay? So once, that's the thing that you've heard of RTI, response to intervention. When they came out with response to intervention, red flags went up in my mind all over the place. I do not like response to intervention. And the reason I don't like it is because children move through it so slowly. And if you have I understand the premise, and the premise was good. But if I'm a parent and I'm at my elementary school and the child's working with RTI and it's working great, they have accommodations, specialized instruction under RTI, and then the child moves to another school division, they have no legal protections. They have to start all over again, right? They don't have a lot of documentation. It's not a legal document. RTI is not legal. And it's just moving from one school to the next, let alone from one state to another state. So I'm always telling parents, if you have a child who is struggling in school because of a disability, you need to push for an IEP. And a lot of parents are hesitant. They like the 504s because they think, some parents, not all parents, they think that the child is less stigmatized, I would say. And I'm also telling parents, if your child is college bound, do not pull them, do not have that IEP taken away when they hit high school. Even if they're not using it a lot, like Casey, when he went to high school, he did have a scribe, but he did not use the special ed teacher very much at all. He used mostly his scribe, voice to text, and extended time on tests, and test in isolation. But if we had let the IEP go, when he goes to college, and oftentimes they get to college and their first semester is a struggle because they want to try it on their own, right? The work is much harder, and now they don't have those accommodations or modifications to give them that support. And, it's really hard to recover once you're in college. And it's expensive because now you've got to go pay $3,000 to get your own evaluation done. So, because the evaluation needs to be no older than 3 years when you enter college. So they always do a triennial evaluation in high school. Actually, they're supposed to do a triennial evaluation every 3 years, unless the team agrees that it doesn't have to be done. Like, for instance, Casey did not have triennials. We used the Mayo Clinic documentation until he got into high school. And then we did a full triennial evaluation because we wanted it for him to go to college. We didn't want the college to say, we really can't use the Mayo stuff when he was 8 years old. We need additional documentation. So he had it redone his junior year in high school. So he had that for the college process. But yeah, good question. But the 504 is still a legal document. It's just not as hefty as the IEP. Other questions? Any questions on other assignments?
I have a quick question. Well, this is probably not a quick question. It's probably a huge topic. But how, so the schools are obligated to provide the accommodations under the IEP. Since we haven't been in school, what's happening with this pandemic period? If children aren't getting the accommodations and not able to pass their courses, and I'm thinking of like middle and high school students.
They're supposed to be working with them virtually.
Okay.
They're supposed to be continuing the IEP and giving them as much support as they can. For instance, my sister is a teacher in Texas, and they're very strict. She's working with preschoolers. She was driving around to houses, dropping off materials for her preschool students. Then she would have virtual meetings once a week with every parent to walk them through the things that they could do to help their child, because that was in the IEP. You had to make sure. Now, North Carolina, the family I'm working with in North Carolina, they did nothing. The mother emailed 3 times asking that he needed to connect with a teacher to get some help on his assignments per his he had a 504 plan. They never responded to her ever. So they were out of compliance. Well, we have, let's see, the complaint was filed on Friday for that child, because we are filing a complaint with the North Carolina Public Instruction, and I know I said I would share that with you, and I will, and to the Office of Civil Rights for that child. I think there's 16 violations just under 504. And we also, we said there was a violation under IDEA because of they said he was ineligible for an IEP when he really was eligible.
So interesting. Well, this has affected my high school age son, so I'm interested in how it will all play out.
They're supposed to have provided accommodations for him. Now at the college level, we've been very, I wouldn't say accommodating, and we've taken into consideration, like I have a student with ADHD, and this student we had a virtual meeting. He said, this is not working. I need some help here. And so basically we're extending the time for him to finish his coursework into the fall so that he can get on campus and get some help.
Wow.
So schools are supposed to be helping.
We had a 504 meeting 4 days before schools were closed. And so we had the 504 meeting. It was a follow. He had one the year before. And so we reconvened it to do some additional accommodations, agreed on the accommodations. School closed 4 days later. He was going into the school closure with a D in the class. And then come last week, she failed him, but he had no accommodations. So he struggled so badly with the online learning and all the executive functioning that it required to do the work. It was, even with me hanging over his head, it didn't happen. So anyway, I'm living this.
Yeah, that's what happened to my friend in North Carolina. Now what they did is they came out with everybody, they went totally pass-fail.
Right.
So he did pass, but she said the same thing. She said executive functioning, not happening. She goes, even standing over him, it just isn't working. And the teachers were not, she said she tried to get a teacher just to do a virtual meeting. She said, he'll listen to you.
Right.
You know how to work with him in the classroom, right? Mothers standing over often does not work. It's just a different environment, a different point of view. But yeah, that is very, very common. Now, it's kind of interesting. I'm doing this AP grading, and they have a whole new protocol for COVID situations. So if a student was writing a paper, and so we have all of these new protocols to follow to help with the scoring of that student's paper if they couldn't collect data because of COVID. Here's what they were told to do, and those kinds of things. So yeah, the school should have intervened, but I don't think around here they're doing much. I know I have a couple of my students who are teachers. A couple of them were doing online teaching with their students, but not everybody.
Yeah, I thought it was really bold of her to fail him. So I asked her for all her grades on all the assignments, and none of them were failing grades. They were all passing grades. So I'm in the middle. This is just an interesting, and I don't want to take the time of the class to go on about this, but it's more alive to me because I'm dealing with it.
Well, you need to fight it.
Yeah.
Just keep the documentation and what accommodations were not applied. They don't have a leg to stand on.
Right. Yeah. I just want him to pass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they didn't do I thought in Virginia the high schools were doing pass fail.
They weren't. They didn't fail. The teacher failed him. It was pass fail.
Oh, yeah. I would definitely get the principal and the director of special ed involved.
Yeah, I will. I am. I've started the ball rolling.
Good, good. Just quickly, and I know it's getting late, accommodations and modifications are different. Accommodations do not change the curriculum. Modifications change the curriculum. So an accommodation might be, they're going to do 5 math problems instead of 10 math problems. That's an accommodation. But if I said, they're not going to follow the 3rd grade math curriculum, they're going to follow the 2nd grade math curriculum in 3rd grade, that's a modification to their curriculum. So you're changing the curriculum for the student. So there's a difference between modifications and accommodations, and that's an important distinction. Okay, I would say that most students have more accommodations than they do have modifications. Okay. As a child gets older, you'll have fewer and fewer modifications because the parents have to decide, and the child has to decide, are they going for a diploma or not? So if they're not going for a diploma, you can modify the curriculum very heavily. If they're seeking a standard or an advanced diploma, they really have to meet the curriculum expectations. So there's only you can't really modify the curriculum very much. But you can provide a lot of accommodations. Extended time on assignments, scribes, note takers, oral tests, right? All those kinds of things. Okay. Well, my throat's getting a little sore. I talked way too much tonight. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you next Tuesday at 8 o'clock if there's nothing else.
I don't think so. Thank you.
Okay. And then I did record this, and I'll post it when it's finished downloading, which will take a while because I think it was an hour.
All right. Good night.
All right. Good night.
Bye.
Here. Nice seeing your faces.